Hello guys, Captain Alex Mason here, and I'm back for part 2. And what I was talking about previously before was about the falling man. He decided to jump headfirst, and it was later estimated that maybe 200 people committed suicide jumping off the building. And the man who I told you about, who you can easily find anywhere now, the falling man, his identity has still not been, he still hasn't been identified. But, you know, to witness that, like, for those people who are old enough to witness this, and saw all this, imagine this whole place being like ground zero, basically. Now imagine this in real life, only people were buried down here. And now some schools, or some places, are thinking that we shouldn't do a program on this anymore, which upsets me, because nowadays most of the kids in our generation don't know what 9/11 is, and to be honest, they should know what it is, because this, you know, it's just like being told about Pearl Harbor. Everybody eventually learned about Pearl Harbor when they were my age or earlier, and, you know, it was one of those tragic events. Only it was awful. But back to what I was saying before. Yeah, 200 people may have jumped off, and now at 9:59 a.m. in New York, South Tower of the World Trade Center, which was hit only after the first tower was hit, collapsed 56 minutes after the crash. And later on, at 10:22 a.m., the North Tower, which is the one that got hit first, eventually collapsed. There are like a lot of news stations that were recording this whole thing for about an hour. Like as soon as the plane struck, everybody was starting to get feed from it. Like, let's just use this as an example. Barney the Dinosaur and like kids programmings were stopped. It was all on standstill. And when President George Bush returned to the White House, he went to the Pentagon in the non-damaged part of the building, and then Secretary of Defense, like the previous Secretary of Defense, Ronald Rumsfeld, issued out DEFCON 3 to all the U.S. Armed Forces. And the last time DEFCON 3 was issued, it was during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And at 4 p.m. that day, the International Space Station released a satellite image of the attack in Manhattan. And eventually, if you guys have seen pictures of what Ground Zero looks like, with all the people covered in like ashes and stuff and smoke, those people suffered a lot of wounds, whether it be scratches and scars that they got from the bits of shrapnel or bits of debris falling from buildings and other buildings around, or being affected by the chemicals that were released, because when the World Trade Center was built, it was built in the 1970s, early 70s, when a certain building material, which is now banned because of its effects, can cause cancer. And let's just say a lot of people eventually suffered cancer from this, and this was asbestos, or I hope I'm pronouncing this right. But yeah, later on, the entire city of New York was closed to visitors. Nobody was allowed to get in, and nobody was allowed to leave New York. And they didn't really have Homeland Security yet. They had a Homeland Security Act, but they didn't have the actual agency available. But eventually, all the airports halted their planes, and there were no airliners or jets or any planes of any kind flying above the entire country for the rest of that week or month, or how long of an period of time they had. Later at Ground Zero, if everybody remembers that picture of the 3 firefighters lifting that flag at Ground Zero, that was actually taken, the owner of a boat gave the flag to them, and he was a true patriot. His yacht was where it originally came from, and it was called Star of America, and it was raised at Ground Zero. The photo itself was taken at 5 p.m. that day, and ever since the flag raising, that flag has been missing. They have never found the original flag, and many people want you to believe that flag has been in custody by the city of New York, but that's not true. It turns out that the one that they claimed was the flag was a few inches wider and a few inches longer than the original flag was, and the flag may have been stolen or disappeared. The guy created a website in 2013 called www.findthe911flag.com in hopes that he could retrieve this patriotic icon. And when the president was still on his plane heading for the Pentagon, Vice President and President authorized the U.S. Air Force to shoot down any suspected planes that would not reply to staying away from New York or any of the other intended targets. There was a fourth flight, and that flight is mentioned here somewhere. It was Flight 93. United Airlines Flight 93 was heading for Washington, D.C., and it's still not known whether or not the airliners was heading for the Capitol building, which is where all of our government decisions are made, or the White House. So at that time, the Capitol building was evacuated in case that would happen. But the passengers and the crew all they resisted, and they revolted against the hijackers, and the hijackers were actually shocked that they did this, and that was at 9:28 a.m. And basically at 9:28, the hijackers tried to persuade the passengers and crew members not to revolt by saying that they had a bomb on board, and saying, we have a bomb on board, and so you sit, don't try anything. But these passengers have been making phone calls, and this is on the other planes too, that they were making contacts to their family and loved ones. And you know, was like one of those moments that you don't want to say your last goodbyes at. And at 9:57 a.m. The the passengers and the crew members actually made it into the actual cockpit and killed one terrorist, but they eventually all died. They eventually crashed near a diamond T mine located in Somerset County of Pennsylvania, and the crash site has been closed, as I am aware of right now. And later, there were at least about 3,000 casualties of people. 19 were hijackers, 2,977 were civilians. There were an overall 2,606 casualties in New York. 246 people were killed on the planes. 292 were killed on the street by burning and falling debris and from people jumping off the World Trade Center. 125 were killed at the Pentagon. 55 of them were military personnel. And then, of course, many of them died because of toxic materials that were exposed. Um, 343 people died in the FDNY. 1,140 first responders were diagnosed with cancer due to the old building material in the Trade Center. 23 NYPD police officers were killed. 37 Port Authority Police Department officers were killed. 15 EMTs were killed. 2,000 first responders were injured. And October 7th of 2001, a month after the attacks, the United States declared war on Osama bin Laden and his people, and we eventually killed him in Abbottabad, Pakistan in 2011. And many of you know that there's a new tower called the Freedom Tower, and it first started production in April 27th of 2006 after it was allowed to, and it will be opened in like late 2014. There has been a World Trade Center memorial which was opened on September 11th during the 10th anniversary, and that was opened only to the victims and family members of the 9/11 attacks, and a day afterwards it was released to the public. And now, this is the reason why I think we should remember is this, because this is something we can't just ignore, something we can't just forget. It's just like what the Chinese did with the Tiananmen massacre. They forced their own people to completely forget about the whole massacre at their square by shutting off all news media and everything. And many other countries revolted and said, that's not right. Even if you are a communist nation, you shouldn't force your own people to forget something that you and they were involved. And you know, it's something you really shouldn't forget. And all the World Trade Centers through 1 through 7 were all destroyed because of the event. But the main targets were 1 and 2, which was Twin Towers. So now that I've made my little tribute, I'm gonna stop making videos for the rest of the day, possibly the rest of the week, because this is like a time of mourning. So if possible, let's all just take our last few seconds with a moment of silence. I'm Captain Alex Mason. I'll see you guys later.